Another British lawmaker has submitted a letter of no confidence in the British Prime Minister as a wave of resignations hits Boris Johnson's government. Aaron Bell says Johnson's handling of the Downing Street lockdown parties, publicly known as Partygate, has made his position untenable. Johnson could face a vote of no confidence in his leadership if 54 of his 360 Conservative lawmakers submit letters of no confidence. So far, a dozen MPs have publicly turned on the Premier and submitted such a letter. Johnson's government has also seen the departure of 5 senior number 10 aides in less than 24 hours. The Premier has faced growing calls to resign. Joining us now for the program is Syed Pourreza, Press TV correspondent from London, and Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol. Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you both to the program here. Syed, we're going to start with you. Hope you're doing safe and sound out there, bud. What could you tell us?
A lot of speculation over how Rishi Sunak, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, will act, because he is the favorite of the party to replace Boris Johnson if he is shown the door at number 10 Downing Street.
All right, thank you, Syed. And Tony, I'd like to welcome you to the program. It's been a while. Hope you're doing well out there in Bristol. Now, Tony, it's funny because you see that the Republican Party in the States, and whatever Donald Trump did, they stood firmly behind him. But one thing we know about the Tories is that if the going gets really tough, and a lot of people feel like they're not there yet. I still don't see it adding up to 54 MPs. A lot of people don't, but nevertheless, he has that sleaze scandal, the excessive refurbishment of his apartment. More than 2 people couldn't meet outdoors. A lot of people couldn't see the beloved ones. And then here's this guy and his cronies, multiple parties, not just one in the holidays, one right on the Andrew Phillips the night before, two before the funeral there in mid-April. But nevertheless, we know that the Tories, when the going gets tough, they will bail on their leadership. We've seen it in the past. Do you think we're there yet now?
No, I don't. And I think we have to be a little bit sceptical about what the press says and which way they fly, because that ultimately it's the Conservative MPs that will decide this, not the press, although we have a very arrogant press that likes to call for the heads. It's like Alice in Wonderland, off with his head. They did this with Colonel Gaddafi. They tried to do it with President Assad. Oh, they've got to go. The press loves doing this. And, of course, it's a large part of the press is part of the deep state. Effectively, they are owned and controlled by the same people who own and control the pharmaceutical companies, the arms industry, the City of London, effectively, the big financial centres. So I would take what the press is saying actually with a pinch of salt and look at the facts here. We've got one more person who sent a letter in to the 1922 committee. As far as we know, they haven't even reached the 1/3 threshold that they need in order to trigger an election of Boris Johnson. And the most important matter here is that very few of the commentators are really looking at. You've just mentioned it there, which a lot of the British press haven't, is who will take over if Boris goes. Now, anyone with half a brain can see that it's very important that you have someone take over who's going to be better than Boris. Rishi Sunak, he apologised for voting Brexit, although apparently he did vote Brexit. He later thought it was the wrong thing to do. And also Liz Truss and Jeremy Hunt, who are the other 2 frontrunners in the Tory party, they're both Remainers. So, basically, if you were throwing out Boris, you're also throwing out Brexit. So that's an important thing to understand as well. But I think maybe the key thing from this week has been Boris's attack on Starmer for being the head of the Crown Prosecution Service when the paedophile BBC presenter Jimmy Savile was not prosecuted. Now, I know for a fact at least twice Surrey police presented evidence to Keir Starmer's department, to his office, explaining that this guy was a child molester and should be prosecuted. Now, the reason that Boris has picked up on this story, and your viewers can check it for themselves if they want, but whilst he was the Director of Public Prosecutions, these things happened. This man, this monster, was not prosecuted by the institution which which Keir Starmer was in charge of. Now, Keir Starmer can say, I had nothing to do with this, but it's very unlikely that he knew nothing about it, as Savile was an amazingly important figure, friend of Prince Charles, for example, that Starmer didn't know anything about it. And what's happening is, actually, Boris is using this against Starmer, because he's saying, in a dog whistle type fashion, he's saying, well, look, I didn't make these decisions about parties at number 10. I was running the country. One of my lowly officials was doing that sort of thing, and it's them that got this wrong. You can't blame me for something that one of my minor officials has done. And it also, he had a fairly reluctant attitude towards going to, quite a lot of these parties he was invited to, he wouldn't go, even his own birthday party. So, the same applies to Keir Starmer. It's not good enough for him to say that he didn't know what his lowly officials were doing. So I think Boris has been quite clever. I also don't think he's really in too much danger at the moment. Of course, the real villain of this piece is Dominic Cummings, who's Boris's chief of staff during many of these parties, who may have even been the one that said, oh yes, it's okay, you can have a party according to the government rules. And so he's a very Machiavellian figure, and he is now doing everything he can. I'm sure he's being paid very well for it, to stab Boris in the back, his old boss.
And Said, when you guys are both residing there, what do ordinary Britons, how do they feel about the parties, the partying? Boris Johnson's initial denials that he even attended any of them or that they took place, and then when emails came out and proof came out that there were multiple parties actually, and he wasn't attending a couple of them, not all of them, to Tony's point, but and then imploring everyone not to jump to conclusions until there's the results of this internal probe were out, and that was heavily redacted. So a lot of maybe the people in the public feel like this thing has not been properly addressed, or is it that some Britons just really don't care about it?
Well, I can tell you they don't necessarily.
That was hold on, Tony. That was over. That was to Said. I'm going to get your take on it. Go ahead, Said.
I obviously don't know how everybody thinks, but the people I have personally spoken to said that they were disgusted, that they consider Boris Johnson as morally corrupt and lacking in integrity. Some of the words people use to describe this prime minister, and they wanted him to go. And they said, what else will have to happen for him to be to resign or to be kicked out of number 10 Downing Street? That is the overriding feeling among the people that I talk to. There are others, again, like I mentioned earlier, just like the Daily Mail, for instance, saying we have never had a president like him before, that he's the right man. We have to move on. But those are people who perhaps voted for Brexit and for other things that were important to them, which is why they voted for Prime Minister Boris Johnson. But the majority of the people I talk to absolutely outraged and disgusted by what's gone down at Downing Street, and also the area that is called Whitehall, those parties that took place at a time when people really couldn't, hold their dying loved ones' hands when they were passing away, or attending funerals, or going to visiting their members of their family. They're really have not taken kindly to these revelations, especially, as you say, the Prime Minister denying anything had happened and saying if there were any parties, he was sure all the rules were followed, then saying that he was not told he was walking into a party where the guidelines were not being followed, then after that apologizing for all of it. So that flip-flopping has not really gone down well with the general public here.
Thanks. And Tony, your peers, how do they feel about it, and how far do you think this thing will go as far as damaging Boris Johnson as leader of the Tories, and the country for that matter?
I think it's a bit of a London-centric point of view. The London media bubble doesn't tend to really reflect what's going on, particularly in the north of England. And where I am here in the west of England, most people don't care about the parties. Many of them were secretly having parties themselves. And you have to also think of the context of this. We're now halfway through this parliament, just coming up to halfway through. And anybody in the deep state and the establishment, that wants to have a proper election next time. In other words, to have Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, fighting a Tory leader who is equally inarticulate, equally wooden, knows they need to get rid of Boris Johnson in order to have a proper democratic-looking contest. Because Boris can actually think for himself, surprisingly, and that's why he's lasted so long, is because he will go whichever way it looks as if his party and his MPs want him to go. So he's perfect, really, to stay in power, whereas you'll get with Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak or Jeremy Hunt is literally a deep state puppet taking over. And I think that's why they know that they need to get rid of Boris now if he's not to carry on and fight the next general election in what we expect to be in 2024. So there's a massive effort by the globalists and the deep state to get rid of Boris. But at the moment, it's really something that, for example, we had a rare honest vox pop, talking to ordinary people in Grimsby in the north of England, some lovely old ladies doing their knitting classes, and they were saying, well, this is a load of nonsense. I mean, he's just had a party. Can they just not get over it? Let him get on and do the job. And anyway, they were saying that the Prime Minister's job is not to make sure the rules are being enforced at Downing Street. His job is to run the country. So I think this is a continuing effort to oust Boris, exactly mimicking the continuing efforts to oust in the press Colonel Gaddafi and to blacken the name of President Assad. It's the same kind of formula, but I don't think it's going to work in this case, and I believe Boris will be fighting the next general election here because these people are, I think, trying something. They're banging their heads against a brick wall and they are not hiding to nothing. It may be that there are deals done behind the scenes. I'm not privy to that, but Boris certainly has the ability to stay there for another couple of years and fight the next general election if he's courageous enough to do it.
All right, gentlemen, good stuff. Always a pleasure to see both of you. Stay safe to you both, and thank you. Said Perez, Press TV correspondent there, joining us from London, and Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist.